Welcome. Welcome, everybody. This is the third session of our AAEP Virtual Wednesday Roundtables for 2026. The purpose of these are to bring you the latest information on both clinical and non-clinical issues important to the equine veterinarian. This roundtable is entitled Approved or Not, Navigating Devices, Compounding, and Compliance. We've got a whole panel full of experts for this session. Dr. Ashley Morgan will kick things off for us. And we have Cindy Bernsteel with FDA, Lauren Forsyth, who is a pharmacologist discussing compounding, and we have Dr. Stuart Brown and Mike Casey here to discuss AVMA and PLIT. Once we get started, I'll let each of them introduce themselves a little further. But first, we have that bit of housekeeping. Please take advantage of the interactive nature of these roundtables. We want you to chime in with your questions and your comments using the Q&A and the chat features. We'll try to get to as many of your questions as possible. And do keep in mind tonight, because our speakers are coming in either one at a time or just in pairs, try to ask your questions before I kick that speaker out of the window. So let's do try to keep up with those questions. It'll be harder to bring a speaker back later on to answer questions. But you've got the Q&A box, you've got the chat, and also don't forget that reaction button. Now, reminder that this session does indeed convey race-accredited CE. If you're watching this online and you're a member of AAEP, you'll receive your certificate without even needing to take the quiz. If you're watching on demand, you'll find a quiz that you have to pass in order to earn your credits. And a quick shout out to Amity Wall, our IT woman behind the curtain, standing by to help. But before we get started tonight, I do want to give special thanks to our sponsor for this and all of our virtual Wednesday Roundtable sessions. That's American Regent Animal Health. And I'd like to give sponsor representative Dr. Howland Mansfield a few moments to speak. Dr. Mansfield, you are an old hand at this, and we're so happy to have you here again. And when you're finished, if you'll pass over that virtual microphone to Dr. Morgan, please.
Thank you, Karen. Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Dr. Howland Mansfield, and I'm the Senior Manager of the Professional Services Veterinarians at American Regent Animal Health, makers of Equine IM and Beta Vet. I want to give a big thank you to all of you for attending tonight. It's great to see so many colleagues committed to continuing education and equine practice. Your dedication to caring for horses and supporting the people who love them is truly meaningful work. American Regent Animal Health is proud to be an educational partner of the American Association of Equine Practitioners for over 20 years, supporting educational programs that benefit the association, its members, and the horses you serve every day. We are excited to sponsor this evening's virtual roundtable session on Approved or Not, Navigating Devices, Compounding, and Compliance with this esteemed panel. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us this evening. And if you'd like more information on American Regent Animal Health or our products, you can visit aranimalhealth.com. Without further ado, I'm pleased to turn it over to our first speaker, Dr. Ashley Morgan, for tonight's roundtable. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Ashley Morgan, AEP's Director of Equine Welfare and Advocacy. I joined the AEP staff about a year ago as the organization strengthened its commitment to advocacy on behalf of the profession and the horse. Tonight, we'll be discussing medical devices and compounded preparations, both of which are commonly encountered in veterinary practice and can raise important questions. We're sharing links to the AEP's Equine Veterinary Compounding Guidelines, the Canadian VMA's guidelines for the legitimate use of compounded drugs in veterinary practice, and the AEP's recently approved position statement on animal medical devices, which replaces a previous white paper on the topic. These all provide some additional context and resources. We're really pleased to bring this webinar to you. I'm joined by a fantastic group of experts. And so with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Cindy Bernsteel with FDA to get us started.
Thank you, Dr. Morgan. Give me a second to bring Dr. Bernsteel on. And then let's see. It always takes a moment. Here she comes. Okay, Dr. Bernsteel. Yeah, we've got you. So anytime you're ready to share your screen is fine with me. But first, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Right. Hello, my name is Dr. Cindy Bernsteel. I am the Deputy Director for Drugs and Devices at FDA's Center for Veterinary Medicine. And hopefully you can see my screen. You can see the screen? Okay, good. All right, thank you. All right, I will go ahead and get started. I'm going to talk about animal drugs and devices and how to report adverse drug experiences. And I'm going to start my timer so I don't go over.
All right. And just a quick reminder, everyone, try to get your questions to Dr. Bernsteel in before I send her away. So get those questions in. Thanks. Right. Okay, Dr. Bernstein.
Okay. CVM's mission, the Center for Veterinary Medicine's mission, is protecting human and animal health, and our responsibilities include animal drugs and devices, human and animal food safety, as well as animal biotechnologies. The regulation of animal products is a little bit confusing in that it's regulated by 3 separate agencies. FDA regulates animal drugs, including some flea and tick products, specifically those that receive their effect through systemic absorption. We also regulate devices used in animals and animal food. EPA regulates some flea and tick products, specifically those that do not require systemic absorption to have their effect. And USDA regulates veterinary biologics. So how is a drug defined in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act? It's articles recognized in the official US Pharmacopoeia, the official homeopathic pharmacopoeia of the US, or the official national formulary, or articles intended for use in the diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in man and other animals, and articles other than food intended to affect the structure or function of the body of man or other animals, and then articles intended for use as a component to any of those top 3. I'm just briefly going to touch on what food is, since there's that other than food. And food is described in the Act as articles used for food or drink for man and other animals. It includes chewing gum and articles used for components of those. And most commonly, we describe food as articles used by people in the ordinary way they use food, primarily for taste, aroma, and nutritive value. And that's all I'm going to say about food. So we're going to go back to drugs. So there are 4 categories of legally marketed drugs for animals, and I'm going to go through each of these briefly. So the first is the approved drugs. So this would be the full approval. These drugs have a pre-approval process and have to adequately address the following technical sections. They are safety, which includes target animal safety, ensuring that the drug is safe for the animal we're giving it to. Human user safety, to make sure that it's safe for the person applying or administering the drug. And human food safety, for ensuring that the food that we eat from food animals is safe to eat if the drug is given to a food animal. They also have to address effectiveness, environmental impact, quality manufacturing, proper labeling. And just to remind you that when a product is approved or when a drug is approved, the specific formulation is approved, not just the active ingredient. So for approved drugs, they adequately address all of those technical sections, and the standard for effectiveness is what we call substantial evidence of effectiveness. These products can be used legally in an extra label manner, and the label for an approved drug will have one of these following 2 statements on it. approved by FDA under new animal drug application number, followed by a 6-digit number for a pioneer, or approved by FDA under ANADA number, which stands for abbreviated new animal drug application. So what's the difference between a pioneer and a generic? And I just wanted to explain this. So the pioneer, and I'm sorry if this is sounding very remedial, but I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. A pioneer animal drug is the original FDA approved medication. It's approved as an NADA, again, addressing all of those technical sections that I talked about. It's typically referred to as a brand name drug or a reference listed new animal drug. And then there's a generic animal drug, commonly referred to as a copy. A generic animal drug has also gone through the FDA approval process, ensuring safety, effectiveness, and quality. And that is often demonstrated through bioequivalence to the pioneer drug. So both a pioneer and a generic are approved animal drugs. I wanted to show you what it looks like just in a picture format here. So this is an approved drug. It has the approved by FDA statement here in the bottom left. And you can say whether it is a generic or a pioneer. How well you were paying attention here. So this one would be a pioneer because it has the NADA number. If it were a generic, it would be ANADA. So any product that is approved for use in animals will have one of those two statements on the label. The second legal marketing category is conditional approval. Conditional approval is a pathway to a full approval. The animal drug has met the standards for all of those technical sections, except the effectiveness standard for a conditionally approved drug is reasonable expectation of effectiveness instead of substantial evidence. These products cannot be used in a legal extra label manner, and their labeling will state conditionally approved by FDA pending a full demonstration of effectiveness under application number followed by a number. And the drug name will have the suffix -CA for conditional approval followed by a number. And this is what it looks like in a product. I apologize, it's a little bit blurry, but you can see that conditionally approved statement, and you can see that at the top, it has the -CA1 after the name. So that's a conditional approval. Next is index drugs. This is a category where qualified experts outside of FDA agree that the benefits outweigh the risk. This is only for drugs for non-food producing minor species or non-food early life stages of food producing minor species. And just really quickly, minor species is defined as any species that's not major. I know that's a little bit silly, but the major species are cattle, swine, horses, chickens, turkeys, dogs, and cats. And anything that isn't one of those 7 is a minor species. Index drugs also cannot be used in a legal extra label manner, and their labeling will state legally marketed as an FDA index product under MIF, followed by a 6-digit number. And what that looks like on an index drug is this statement there. And by providing you these examples, I'm in no way promoting or encouraging the use of any of these drugs. I just wanted to show you a real example of what this looks like, just so you can see that you can easily tell if a product is approved or conditionally approved or indexed. The fourth category of legal marketed drugs is relatively new, and that's relatively new for animals, and that's emergency use authorization. This requires the Department of Health and Human Services to determine and declare an emergency, and the authorization is based on the totality of available scientific evidence that it is reasonable to believe that the drug may be effective and that the known/potential benefits outweigh the known/potential risks when used under the conditions of the authorization. These products also cannot be used in a legal extra label manner. To date, the only emergency use authorizations for animal drugs that have been issued are for drugs indicated to treat or prevent New World screwworm myiasis in animals. For any authorized drug, you can find some of these links will be provided to you later, but there's a New World Screwworm webpage. And when a product is authorized, there's a Freedom of Information summary, a letter of authorization, and a fact sheet for each of those. And the fact sheet describes how to use the product. And so this is just a little clip from part of the fact sheet to show you what that looks like. All right, so those were our 4 category of legally marketed drugs. Now we're going to talk about unapproved animal drugs. These are drugs that are intended for use in animals, and it meets the definition of a new animal drug, but they do not have a legal marketing status. It's illegal to market unapproved animal drugs, and these drugs may not meet the agency's strict standards for safety and effectiveness and quality manufacturing, properly labeled. Examples of these animal drugs include drugs that are compounded from bulk drug substances, as well as many products that are marketed as supplements. And then a device. This is the definition for a medical device. This is not specific to animals. It is, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit of this, an instrument, apparatus, implement, or machine that is intended for use in the diagnosis of disease or other conditions, or in the cure, mitigation, treatment, or prevention of disease in man or other animals, or which is intended to affect the structure or any function of the body of man or other animals. And it does not achieve its primary intended purposes through chemical action within or on the body of man or other animals, and is not dependent on being metabolized for the achievement of its primary intended purposes. Devices include such things as needles and syringes, X-ray equipment, certain diagnostic tests, bandages, and many other things. But I just wanted to do a little bit of a side-by-side for you for an approved animal drug versus animal medical device. So the approved drug, as I talked about, has a pre-market review. They have to adequately address safety and efficacy, ensure that the manufacturing process is adequate to preserve the drug's strength, identity, and purity, and that the labeling is truthful and not misleading. For animal medical devices, there is no pre-market review or approval required to market prior to marketing. Congress did not give us that authority. The firm has not had to demonstrate that the product is safe and effective, or that the manufacturing process is adequate to maintain the quality and consistency of the product. For approved animal drugs, there's post-market monitoring, and sponsors are required to report problems to FDA. For animal medical devices, there's no requirement for them to report problems to FDA. Oops, sorry. Just briefly again, the approved animal drug relies on a chemical action occurring in or on the animal's body to achieve the primary intended effect, whereas an animal medical device does not require chemical action in or on the animal's body to achieve the primary effect. So there's also a few things that are on animal drug labels that can be confusing, some statements, and I just wanted to let you know that none of these statements mean that the drug is FDA approved, right? Only this drug is approved by FDA, NADA number or ANADA number. That's how you tell a drug is approved. These statements, while all true statements, don't mean the drug is approved. So if it says made in an FDA approved facility, it doesn't make it an approved drug. And if it has an NDC number on it, that does not make it an approved drug. An NDC number is a National Drug Labeler Code number that all drugs have on them. And just a reminder here that even if a marketed product has the same active ingredient as an FDA-approved drug, it doesn't make that marketed product approved as well. I just wanted to talk very briefly about extra label use. This is the Animal Medicinal Drug Use Clarification Act, or AMDUCA, amended the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to permit veterinarians under certain conditions to use approved human and animal drugs in ways that aren't listed on the drug's labeling. And the full regulations can be found at 21 CFR Part 530. To have legal extra label use, you have to have a valid VCPR. It is limited to use in situations where an animal's health is threatened or where the animal may suffer or die without treatment. It's mostly limited to situations where there is no approved new animal drug that is labeled for such use and that contains the same active ingredient in the dosage form and concentration that's required. And it can also be where a veterinarian finds within the context of a valid VCPR that the approved new animal drug is not clinically effective for that use. So when can't you extra label use a drug product? If any of those conditions in 530 are not met, you cannot. As I mentioned earlier, for conditional approval, index drugs and authorized drugs per an emergency use authorization, those products cannot legally be used in an extra label manner. You cannot extra label use drugs used in or on animal feed. There are a few exceptions for minor species, and those can be found in Compliance Policy Guide 615-115. And then this one is a little bit confusing, but if the drug that you want to extra label use is an approved human drug and you want to use it in a food producing animal, and there's an animal drug approved for use in a food producing animal that you can use in an extra label manner, you need to use that animal drug. And then for food animals, which I know doesn't apply for most of you on here, but for food animals, there's a list of drugs that are prohibited from extra label use. And those are also listed in 21 CFR Part 530. So here's a pop quiz, but I can't see the chat, so it's not as much fun. Is this an approved drug or an unapproved drug?
Thumbs up. Use your react button and do thumbs up if you think this is an approved drug. We don't have a thumbs down, so I'm not sure how to do that one.
All right. There's not a lot of information here on the front label. So I will give you a little bit more information. I realize this is a little bit blurry. I did blow it up so it was visible. But the only thing that says anything about federal or FDA is this statement here at the bottom where it says, caution, federal law restricts this product to use by or on the order of a licensed veterinarian. I see mostly not thumbs up, and that is good. This is an unapproved drug. It does not have the approved by FDA statement on the front label. This is an unapproved drug. And then I have one more pop quiz. Is this a generic animal drug? So you can do thumbs up if you think this is a generic animal drug. So remember, a generic animal drug is a fully approved drug. It is just a copy of a pioneer drug. So this one does not have an approved by FDA statement on the label. It does have this little NDC number up here, which I said all of them will have, or most of them will have. And then it does have the prescription warning statement. So this too is an unapproved drug. This is not a generic animal drug. All right, so once a product is approved, then what happens? We continue to monitor that product to ensure that it's continuing to meet the safety, effectiveness, and quality manufacturing. So we'll do inspections to ensure the maintenance of quality of the product. There are labeling reviews and revisions as necessary. We monitor promotional material for the product, as well as monitoring adverse drug experience reports. And end users can and should report adverse events to FDA. And the links that you'll be provided will get you to a website our website that tells how to report animal adverse drug experiences and a copy of the electronic form for reporting those. So what is an adverse drug experience? It's any adverse event associated with the use of a new animal drug, whether or not it's considered to be drug related and whether or not the new animal drug was used in accordance with the approved labeling. Adverse drug experience includes adverse events, lack of effectiveness, and human exposures. So what can you report in an adverse drug experience report? Again, adverse events, lack of expected effectiveness, human exposures that result in adverse events, product defects and manufacturing defects, as well as medication errors. And I'll talk briefly about each of these. So adverse events are any observation in animals, whether or not considered to be product related, that is unfavorable and unintended, and that occurs after use of a veterinary medicinal product. These adverse events can range from mild, such as injection site swelling or redness, to severe, which is such as death. So why should you report adverse events? Well, for approved products, I've talked about the pre-approval drug review process being a rigorous one, and it is, but pre-approval studies are conducted using a relatively small number of animals. Once a product is marketed, it's used in a larger and more diverse population of animals, and therefore less common adverse events and drug interactions can be identified at that time. For unapproved products and devices, your report may be the only information we receive. So the primary way that CVM learns about adverse events is through your reporting. Lack of expected effectiveness is when a product isn't working as you expect it to. And there's several examples here, a couple of them, insulin not controlling blood glucose, or an analgesic not controlling pain, or a sedative not providing the sedative effect that you're used to. And sometimes, like you might say, well, an analgesic doesn't work all the time, but if you're used to using, let's say, Banamine, and it's worked well, and then all of a sudden it's not working, then that's something you should report. And why you should report lack of effectiveness is it could alert CVM to a manufacturing problem. Maybe there was a problem with that particular batch, or there could be effectiveness issues associated with the handling or storage of that product, or potentially effectiveness issues related to drug interactions, or it could be a signal of emerging resistance to that drug. All right, human exposures to animal drug products that result in adverse events. These adverse events, whether accidental or intentional, occur in humans from exposure to animal drug products, either during the manufacture, testing, handling, or use and administration of the new animal drug. And some examples of that are injection. So you can have, like in this picture, some of that product is dripping out on the person's hand. There's also accidental injections. You can have topical exposure from leaky bottles, like pour on antiparasitic drugs, or topical products like that you give dogs and cats for fleas and ticks, as well as ingestion or just some of the product splashing in the mouth or eyes. And why report human exposures? CVM monitors human adverse events that result from exposure to animal drugs. They can alert us to concerns, and these reports can alert CVM to defects with containers or administration devices that could lead to human safety concerns. And once alerted, we can do something about that. Product defects. Product defects are deviation of the product from the standards specified in the approval. And these can include any microbial or chemical contamination. There's also manufacturing defects, which is a product defect caused or aggravated by a manufacturing or related process. A manufacturing defect may occur at a single event, like a point contamination, or from deficiencies inherent to the manufacturing process. These defects are generally associated with product contamination, deterioration, defective packaging, or labeling errors. And here are some examples of product defects. There's particulate matter or crystals in the solution, or discoloration of the solution, broken, damaged, or leaking containers, broken or crumbling tablets, and those could result in overdosing or underdosing an animal, underfilling of product containers, or locking mechanism problems with oral dosing syringes. Why report product defects? Again, product defects could be associated with an adverse event in an animal or a human. It could result in overdosing or underdosing, and it could alert CVM to a manufacturing problem. And knowledge gained from these reports can result in improvements to the product or device and or lead up to a recall as well. And I just wanted to quickly cover medication errors, which should be reported too. These are preventable events that cause or lead to inappropriate medication use. These may or may not result in an adverse event, and they're preventable, but they're mainly caused by packaging or product designs, look-alike or sound-alike names, or visually similar labels. And these two examples here kind of have all three of those. The name of the product is pretty close. The packaging is almost identical. So sometimes you could give the wrong product. Again, it might result in an adverse event or it might not. Reporting medication errors helps alert CVM to an error related to the naming, labeling, packaging, or design. And again, we can increase the safe use of that product by changing the packaging. So who can report an adverse event? Everybody can report, or anybody can report an adverse event. And I'll quickly cover how to report them. So for FDA approved, conditionally approved, or indexed animal drugs, we recommend that you report directly to the drug sponsor. Those drug companies are required to submit adverse event reports to CVM, and this ensures that CVM and the drug companies have the same information. For emergency use authorization drugs, the veterinarians must report what is stated on the letter of authorization. And again, that can be found on our website. That's generally serious adverse events, but we strongly encourage reporting of all adverse events. How to report it is described on the fact sheet. Veterinarians can contact the manufacturer or send in the form 1932A or fill that in electronically. That's just for emergency use authorized drugs. I probably don't need to tell you this, but if you're reporting to a drug company, you can either find their name on the product somewhere or check their website to report to them directly. And for approved products and legally marketed products, you can also send the reports directly to CVM if you want. Sometimes it results in a duplication of reports, but we can figure that out on our end. But what about reporting problems for products that are not approved or legally marketed and/or for devices? These adverse event experience reports should be reported directly to CVM. As I've stated earlier, these, the unapproved drugs and for devices, there's no pre-market approval. So unapproved drugs they don't get an approval. Medical devices, there's no pre-market approval required for them. And it's up to the sponsor and the manufacturer to ensure that that product is safe. And they are not required to submit reports of adverse events or product defects to CVM or FDA. So if you have an adverse experience with a device and you call a device company and report a problem, they're not required to report to us. And that's why we say for these products, we want you to report directly to CVM. There, again, you'll have a link that will get you to the adverse event reporting page, and that'll have the downloadable, fillable form on there. Sometimes the direct link is browser sensitive. And if it doesn't open, there are directions on the web page for how to get it to work. And you can submit additional information such as product photos, medical records to the email when you submit the form as well. When reporting an adverse event, please include as much information as possible, the specific name of the product that you gave, the dosage that you gave, route and administration, the patient's signalment, any concomitant medications, any pertinent medical history, and a detailed description of the adverse event, or if you're reporting a product defect, a detailed description of what that defect is. For the animal, if it's having an adverse event, the physical exam findings, any diagnostics that you did, any treatments that were applied, and what was the outcome. And then if there's any follow-up information, such as follow-up diagnostics or information about the continued success of the patient, then that information is good to provide as well. Again, your reporting of adverse drug experience is very helpful to us. And for unapproved drugs and devices, your report might be the only way that CVM is informed about the safety and effectiveness or lack thereof of these products. Less than 1% of the adverse drug experience reports that we receive are for unapproved drugs and devices used in animals. Reporting, especially from the veterinary community for unapproved drugs and devices, helps CVM to identify serious safety concerns, identify veterinary medication errors, and monitor and evaluate the safety of unapproved drugs and veterinary devices over time. When we get all this information from adverse drug experience reports, what do we do with that? There's several potential outcomes. If there was a problem with the packaging or the packaging design, changes can be made to that. We might provide additional risk mitigation information, whether that's on the labeling or in a client information sheet. If there's a lot of problems with the formulation or cloudiness, turbidity, crystals, that might require a formulation change. And or there might be human or animal safety advisories that we provide. So how does CVM communicate this safety information to you? There's a couple different ways. One is labeling revisions. The second one is animal drug safety related label changes. So there's a website that has all the label changes, client information sheets, and CVM updates. So this is a web page where we list all of the safety related label changes post-approval and what they are. There's client information sheets that come with the drug. Typically NSAIDs and chemotherapy drugs have this. These are written for animal owners and describe how to use the drug and what side effects to look for. And then CVM updates. This is a relatively old one, but it was related to horses. And you can sign up to receive CVM updates. And I will try to get this link to you as well. It might not have been on the ones that I provided, but I will get this link to you as well. So that is all I have, other than to just say again, your report matters. Please report it. You don't have to know that the adverse event is related to the drug. You just have to know that the adverse event happened after you gave the drug. Reports are important for all products, whether they're approved or unapproved. And your reports play an active role in protecting human and animal health. And with that, I don't know if I have time for questions, but
we do have some questions. I think we should jump on a few of them, and then if your question isn't answered this evening, send it to me. I'll pass it along to Dr. Bernstein, and we can get back to you with it. But a few of those questions, and again, attendees, I would beg you please to put your questions in the Q&A box rather than the chat. We have enough questions tonight that it's very hard to keep track of them in chat. But here's a question. Where does the FDA CVM stand on supplements, especially the injectable supplements out there that make clear drug claims?
So supplements, so dietary supplements is a category that was established by what we call DSHEA, the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, and that only applies to human products. So there are no animal drug supplements that are recognized, and those would be, for the most part, an unapproved drug. Unless they have an approved by FDA on there, they're an unapproved drug.
Are all drugs with an NDC number manufactured in an FDA-approved facility?
I have some notes on NDC number. It's the ND. I don't know if it has it in here, but the NDC, the National Drug Code, is a 3-segment number required for all drugs, approved and unapproved, that serves as a universal product identifier. It is a registration and identification tool used to track products currently in commercial distribution. I don't have that if it is for all. What was the question exactly again? If it meant it was from?
Are all drugs with an NDC number manufactured in an FDA-approved facility?
I'm going to say no.
Okay, then. What's the length of time that a manufacturer can market a drug that has conditional approval?
Good question. I didn't cover that. A conditionally approved drug has 5 years to generate the effectiveness data to get to a full approval. They need to make progress each year, and they need to say that they are continuing to work toward approval each year, but they have 5 years.
There are a number of products marketed as devices, but have metabolic pharmacologic actions, and device criteria have not been demonstrated. Why can they do that? And some of them are exhibited at AAEP.
Now, there are so many unapproved drug products out there. And it is frustrating. I understand that there are more than we could take action after. So if it is a device and it meets the definition of a device, they don't have pre-market, we don't have pre-market authority to for pre-market approval, but we do have authority over devices. And if there are problems with them, then we can take action. So I recognize they're out there. I hear you. They are unapproved. They might be saying they're a device, but if they're making drug claims, they're an unapproved drug.
With more generic drugs coming onto the market, often pioneer companies of products will criticize the usage of these generic products. How should a veterinarian decide if a generic option is a good option to choose other than cost? What are the legal ramifications to a veterinarian should an adverse event occur using the generic formulation? And maybe part of that question would be better for Dr. Brown and Mike Casey.
I'll take part of it though. Let me
Sure.
just tell you that a generic animal drug is a fully approved drug, and they have demonstrated bioequivalence to the pioneer. So they are the same as the pioneer. Now, I will tell you that on some websites, unapproved drugs are advertised as being generic, and they are not. So a generic animal drug with an approved by FDA and an ANADA number is a fully approved drug.
There was a question about are unapproved drugs, like the Thyro-L example you showed, illegal to sell/use? If so, why, how does sale use continue? And then someone else in the Q&A mentions that in California, it's illegal to use Thyro-L according to state board. It is considered misbranded.
Yeah, FDA does not regulate the practice of veterinary medicine, and there are a lot of products out there. Yeah, states can have their own regulations. Read the first part of the question for me again. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Sidetracked
hang
with the
on.
California thing.
Yeah, the initial question was basically if something is illegal to use, how can they still make it? And then the comment was that in California,
Yeah.
it's illegal to use it.
Yeah, they are an unapproved drug, and there are a lot of unapproved drugs out there. And part of the reason I wanted to come here and do this talk is to show you how easy it is to tell if a product is approved or not, right? And the assurance that you have when you're using an approved product, that it's demonstrated that it's safe and effective and quality manufactured, and that we're doing continual monitoring post-approval. But there are unapproved drugs out there.
All right, I see some other questions that I think we'll hold till later. So thank you so much, Dr. Bernsteel. We
Thank you.
we
Appreciate it.
your time. And again, you all, if, Mike Casey says he's happy to address the Thyro-L issue when he comes on later today.
Awesome.
So yeah, like I say, I think some of these questions are appropriate to leave till later, but if you have a question specifically for Dr. Bernsteel that I didn't get to because we're going to send her on her merry way, then go ahead and email that to me, and I put my email address in the chat, and I'll pass it along to her.
Thank you.
So, thank you so much, Dr. Bernsteel. And now it's going to take me a moment to bring our next panelist on, and that's will be Lauren Forsyth. There we go. So it does take a moment for people to show up. There she is. Can we hear you, Dr. Forsyth? Can you hear me? Yep.
I can hear you.
That. You've got your, hang on just a second and I will get that screen share up. Okay, I think we are good to go.
Okay, you guys can hear me and see my screen?
Thumbs up, everybody. Can we see and hear both Dr. Forsyth and her screen? Thank you. Thank you. Oh, lots of thumbs up.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Oops. There we go. So I'm Dr. Lauren Forsyth, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. Quick about who I am. I'm a veterinary pharmacist, which means that I went to human pharmacy school, and then I specialized in veterinary by doing my residency at Purdue's Veterinary Teaching Hospital. I went to pharmacy school at the University of Findlay, that Northwest Ohio small school, better known for pre-vet and equestrian than it is for pharmacy. But fun fact is I actually chose to go to pharmacy school in the first place because I figured being a pharmacist could help pay for horse showing and give me the time off to show my horses. So that was my initial motivation. But I fell into veterinary pharmacy, and after my residency, I headed out to California and I spent 3 years as a clinical veterinary pharmacist at the UC Davis Vet Teaching Hospital. I missed the Midwest though, so when I had the chance to go revamp the pharmacy service at the University of Illinois in their College of Vet Med, I went there in 2019 and I spent about 4 years there as their pharmacy service head and a clinical assistant professor in the College of Vet Med. I needed a shift though, and so in 2023, I left Illinois, came back to Ohio and the University of Findlay, where I now teach pharmacy students and I get to teach a pre-vet elective class on veterinary pharmacy as well. I teach law to pharmacy students as my main topic. And then I have a consulting business working with veterinary practices on all their various drug things like controlled substances and compounding and those fun things. But that's a little bit about my background. So let's jump into our topic about compounds. For tonight, we're going to talk about when they're appropriate to use, pros and cons of different dosage forms, and some ways that we can decrease the risk associated with compounds. But I like to start with the benefits. So we have several benefits with compounded medications, which is why we find ourselves reaching for them. These include dosage form manipulations to make it easier to administer, flavoring, changing the dosage strength, availability issues that we can address, and eliminating toxic ingredients. Essentially, we should be using compounded medications to fill the gap where manufactured products fail. And if we can use manufactured products, that's great. But we actually have very few FDA-approved drugs out there for veterinary patients, especially when compared to the amount available for human patients. And so we do find the need for compounded medications in some cases. But these come with risks. And so we have to consider the risks to go along with the benefits of these medications. So for compounding, when we make a medication, we could have too much or too little drug based on what's on the label. We might have the right amount of drug, but by the time it actually gets to the patient, it has degraded to the point that we no longer have the right amount because it lacks stability. And we can even say, well, it's stable in a normal storage environment, but when we consider it's going to get stored in a tack trunk or a horse trailer, or a tack room that is not temperature controlled, and at least where I'm at, it could go from freezing temperatures to 80 degrees in the same day. We can get a lot of issues with stability there. It might lack sterility if it's supposed to be sterile. So injectable products, ophthalmic products, it needs to be sterile, but compounds might not be. They could have that issue. It could lack safety, such as containing toxic excipients or otherwise being harmful. Or it could lack efficacy, such as not being bioavailable. Maybe it's this perfect drug. It has exactly the right amount. It's super stable. It's sterile. There's nothing toxic about it, but it just doesn't work. And bioavailability might be the culprit there. So I'm going to look into what these look like a little bit more. And we'll start with stability because it comes with fun pictures. So sometimes drug can degrade and we have no indication looking at it that it has happened. But other times we can look at compounded products and see when there's likely stability issues going on. So the pictures here are all amlodipine suspension. The one in the center is what it should look like. It's got bubbles. It was just shaken. It's a suspension, so that's okay. But then if you look at the ones on the sides, inside those circles are big white clumps. That is drug powder. And that is a problem because if you try to draw out a dose from that bottle, you would either get a big clump of drug powder and have way more drug than you should, or you would get no clumps and have way less drug because it's all clumped up someplace else. So we've got issues. And the fact that the amlodipine suspension used to make nicely into the center picture, and then all of a sudden one day started making it with these clumps that would not go away, we said, well, what's going on? Well, what we figured out was the room where the drug had been stored over the weekend had gotten really humid and it absorbed too much moisture. And the ingredient we were putting in was not stable when we put it into the suspension. We got a new bottle and it was fine after that. Sometimes we can see color changes that indicate stability issues. So all of these are an SSD otic suspension, or at least an attempt at it. The one on the far right is the way we would typically make it with SSD powder and glycerin. However, dermatologists said, you know what? We don't want it to be quite so viscous. Can you put it in something other than glycerin? So we said, okay, fine, we'll try something else. Well, to get a reasonable beyond use date, we needed to make sure it was preserved. So we said, let's try bacteriostatic water and bacteriostatic saline. The center one is what happens when you mix sulfur sulfadiazine with bacteriostatic saline. There was obviously chemical reactions going on because you should not mix clear liquid and white powder and get black liquid. So that's definitely a problem. So we said, well, let's try this bacteriostatic water. The far left one is what happens when you do that. It's not nearly as black, but you can still see it's got this purpley gray tint. You still shouldn't get purpley gray from mixing clear with white. So there's still a reaction going on. Likely that silver is interacting with things. If you've seen silver on a saddle, gets tarnished, you get the black or the purpley type color. So that's probably what I think is happening. Either way, that's a problem. So we did not make it in either of those. But there's also lots of literature out there about these different risks. So they're not just theoretical. And I know it's very tiny writing. I don't expect you to read all those citations, but if you want them, the QR code in the corner, you can scan and get the full list. So I'm just going to highlight a couple that I think emphasize the point about the different risks. So we're going to start with drug concentration, which is what all of these studies here deal with. And we'll start with some from UC Davis. So we're going to look at an oncology one first. And the oncology group would sometimes use compounded lomustine, or they would use the commercial strengths when they could. So they had patients getting one or the other, but experience with both. And they started seeing that patients that got the compounded lomustine were not getting neutropenic like the ones were with the approved lomustine capsules. And they said, well, that seems odd. We expect it would be the same. So they then looked at potency of the lomustine capsules that were compounded from 5 different pharmacies, and they found that those capsules ranged from 50 to 115%, with only one being within the plus or minus 10% that is actually allowed. This is a chemo drug, so this is something we would compound to get a really exact dose, and we're seeing this huge variability. So then the question is, well, does that happen with just this drug for some reason, or is this happening with other things too? So the same group, a couple years later, did another study, and they looked at chlorambucil, melphalan, and cyclophosphamide from 5 pharmacies again, and they found wide variability for both chlorambucil and melphalan. Cyclophosphamide didn't have it, I don't really know why. It was nicely within the range, but for some reason that one was where it should have been. But the other two were very different on their ranges. Outside of the world of chemo, we have a study from 2021 that looked at famciclovir liquid, and they got drug from 9 503A, so traditional compounding pharmacies, at 3 different time points. So they wasn't just one lot. They made sure they were getting it spaced out. And they looked at 250 mg per mil and 400 mg per mil. With the 250 mg per mil, a quarter of those were within the plus or minus 10% that's allowed. None of the 400 mg per mil were. So again, concerning that we have so much variability and we can't count on these drugs containing the amount they say they should. If we look at efficacy, we also have questions that come up and several studies that talk about this. So we have one from 2012, and this one was looking at trilostane. And so historically, we have trilostane approved product, but we had compounders that were trying to use bulk chemical to compound trilostane. And there was pushback about, does this really work? And so they looked. Now, this one did dissolution. So they said to get the drug absorbed, it has to dissolve. So if the compounded form is not dissolving as well as the commercial product, then we're going to say it's likely not as effective. This was all done just based on dissolution, though. They didn't actually look at the clinical effects of either. And as far as I know, another study was never done on trilostane. Then there's the good old itraconazole. And the 2 studies highlighted here are the dog and cat ones. But there's also ones out there for penguins and parrots with similar outcomes that show that compounded itraconazole is not as effective as the commercially available human or veterinary labeled products for these species. It's likely an issue of getting absorbed and something to do with the cyclodextrin complex that's in there. And then on our horse side, we have some studies on Gastrogard and UlcerGard, so that is omeprazole products. And these are from the early 2000s when we first were having our nice UlcerGard and Gastrogard out there. And the compounders said, well, we can use bulk chemical and we can make it cheaper. And I mean, it's expensive to treat for a month with those. So the horse owners like cheaper. But these studies show that the compounded paste was not as effective as the commercially available product for horses. We have stability studies as well. And the ones I've highlighted here are all ones that are looking at it from are the drugs we're getting stable until the beyond use states the pharmacy gave them? There's studies out there that are stability studies for the purpose of how long can we make this drug be stable for? Let's test that experimentally. But big one here is a doxycycline study that showed that the suspension compounded in a very traditional, straightforward manner lacked stability after 7 days. This is significant because the United States Pharmacopoeia, which gives us the default beyond use states we can use for compounding, they say that oral liquids, when you have no additional data or anything, are good for at least 14 days. And this showed 7 days, and it was already down below minus 10% of the labeled strength. So we're having stability concerns there, even in a time frame that would be legally acceptable. So if we have these risks actually happening, how can we decrease them? Because we still have those benefits, and we want to balance our risk-benefit profile with these compounds. So first, we're going to look at decreasing them through regulations. And we're going to start with looking at preferentially selecting commercial products and compounding from bulk chemicals and what the regulations have to say about those things. So we need to start with Amduca because that is what made extra label drug use acceptable for the actual statute from 1994. And it said, use an approved drug as labeled as your first choice. If you cannot do that, then use an approved drug in an extra label manner. The regulations from 1996 that go along with Amduca, they then go on to say if you cannot use an approved drug as labeled or extra label, then you can compound by manipulating a commercially available product. So this means things like making a suspension by crushing the tablet form and using that as your drug source. But what about when you can't do that? What about that bulk chemical? And it doesn't address that. So the biggest key that we can come from here is compounding for the purpose of it being cheaper is not legal. There needs to be a clinical reason why you cannot use the approved drug in some manner before you reach for a compound. So with the bulk chemicals, the legality of this has shifted because it's never been codified into a regulation clearly. The FDA stands by the fact that it is not allowed. Therefore, these are not legal drugs, and therefore it's technically entirely illegal to compound from bulk chemical. But they then come out and say, we understand it's necessary in certain situations. So they give us guidance documents. And I have CPGs, which are compliance policy guides, and GFIs, which are guidance for industry. And these are technically two different things, but for our purposes, we're going to lump them into the term guidance documents because they essentially affect us the same way. After Amduca was passed, we got CPG 608-400. That got modified again in 2000s when the FDA changed their opinion. But then in May of 2015, it became obsolete. So that one was gone, never to be seen again. In its place, we got draft version of GFI number 230. This was released in May 2015, had a comment period, which is pretty standard, and got tons of comments back. They said, okay, close the comment period, we'll review, then silence. And in November of 2017, it was still in draft form when they said, we are removing this, we will start from scratch, and we will make this a priority for 2018. Well, 2018 came and went, and nothing. 2019 came and almost went. And then we finally got draft of GFI number 256. And so again, comment period is standard practice. So we got a comment period. Also normal. Something like this affects a lot of pharmacies and a lot of veterinarians, and professional organizations on both sides wanted to share lots of opinions. So they said, please extend it. We need more time. So they extended it. Well, they extended it into, like late March, early April of 2020. Well, we all know at the beginning of March in 2020, the world shut down because that was COVID. And so then comment period gets close to being over and everyone says, wait, we need more time. We've been busy dealing with COVID. So they extended it again. And that happened a few times. I think it closed late 2020 or early 2021-ish. Eventually, they went back, made edits based on comments, and then released a finalized version in April of 2022. Now, remember, we have had nothing in final form since that CPG was withdrawn in beginning of 2015. So now we're into April of 2022. We finally have a new finalized document. They say this will go into effect in October of 2022. All the pharmacies said, wait, this is a big change. We need more time. So they extended it. It finally went into effect in April of 2023. And this is the current finalized document that we have at this point. Now, I could go on for a whole hour about the nuances of this, but just some very high-level points from this. It provides guidance on when compounding from bulk chemicals is appropriate. It does not talk about compounding if you're manipulating commercially available products, because that is made legal by the regulations associated with Amduca. But this is talking about the bulk chemicals specifically. And it splits out if you're talking about patient-specific medications or if you're talking about office use. For patient-specific medications, you need to have a reason why the commercial product can't be used, and you need to document that. So there's quite a few different reasons. For example, you can compound things when the commercial product's on back order. But if it's on back order, you can't use it as the source of your drug for compounding. So in those cases, you would need to use a bulk substance. Or maybe it negatively impacts the formulation, or there is no approved product to use. For the office use side, there's a list of bulk chemicals that can be used, and they have to be submitted with an application. The FDA reviews them and then will say yes or no based on their review for office use compounding. So when I think about bulk chemicals from a compounding process perspective, there's pros and cons to using them. So pros, it's pure drug. So we don't have that margin of error. Like I mentioned, with the compounds, they could have a plus or minus 10% margin of error. And manufactured products get that margin of error too. It's not always plus or minus 10%. It's more tailored to the drug specifically, but a lot of them are. So we're just going to generally say plus or minus 10%. So if you have a tablet and you're doing the math, okay, I'm making a suspension and my tablets are 100 milligrams, so I need this many tablets to make my suspension in the desired concentration. Well, that's all well and good, but those tablets in front of you could contain anywhere from 90 to 110 milligrams of drug and be considered perfectly acceptable. And you don't know where it falls in that range. And each lot could be somewhere different in that range. So you aren't able to account for that in your compound. Bulk chemicals are less expensive, typically. That's not a good reason to be using them, but it's a fact and something that is often an underlying consideration. And they can be easier to manipulate. If you are handling the product and you're like, okay, I could weigh out a certain amount of this powder, use a nice little scoop, put it on my scale in the weigh boat, or I could open 100 capsules to get the right amount of drug. It's going to be a lot easier and a lot less mess and a lot less exposure to weigh out the powder versus opening the capsules. But there's also cons. All white powders look the same, and most drugs are white powders. So it's easy to get them mixed up. And these are not fancy labeling. They are each drug company that sells bulk substances for compounding. They typically have a color scheme, white and green or blue and white, and their labels are all that same color. The only difference is the drug name that's on them. So it's easy to mix them up. And these are not independently verified for quality. And then there's also the fact that they're not already formulated into something. This can be helpful, but it can also be a problem. It's a problem because it doesn't give it a distinctive appearance to help decrease errors. But it can be helpful because you're not fighting the chewable tablet concept or the coated tablets or flavorings. And they also have no added excipients. So for example, pentoxifylline comes as a human 400 milligram tablet. It's considered extended release. That property comes from a carboxymethylcellulose added in there. We split it in vet med all the time. That's not unusual and not something that we're concerned about doing. But sometimes we need a liquid. And if you take those tablets and crush them up and try to make a suspension, it is next to impossible because that carboxymethylcellulose starts interacting with your liquid and forms this big gummy gel paste type consistency that is impossible to shake or redispense. Whereas if you take that powder, it dissolves beautifully into an aqueous solution. Super easy because it doesn't have those problematic excipients. So sometimes you just can't make a formulation that's reasonable because of those excipients. So then we need to consider policies and procedures and quality control that goes into preparing the compounds. And this gets into the Drug Quality and Security Act, or DQSA. And this was passed in 2013, and it gave us two types of compounding. So it gave us the 503A pharmacies, which weren't new. These are traditional pharmacies They make patient-specific prescriptions. They might do sterile, non-sterile, both. They follow USP standards, which are compounding standards that are designed to be reasonable for small-scale, one-off formulations for patient-specific needs, while still maintaining the highest level of quality that you can, while still being feasible for that scale. And this is overseen by the states. So you get a lot of variability on exactly what states say about 503A pharmacies. This created 503B outsourcing facilities, which is a new concept. This is office stock compounding. It has to involve some type of sterile compounding. And these are required to follow the current good manufacturing practice standards, which are codified in the CFR. And so because they're codified in the CFR, this is overseen by the FDA. So you can think of these as 503A is traditional patient-specific compounding. If you think of a teaching hospital pharmacy or your local independent compounding pharmacy, traditional compounding. 503B is manufacturing of compounded medications. These are going by the same manufacturing processes drug companies have to follow, but the drugs are not FDA approved. So they are still compounds because they don't have that FDA approval. And we have different standards that they follow as well. So we have with the United States Pharmacopoeia, like I said, it's designed for small scale, patient specific. If you don't have stability studies, they have default beyond use states you can use. And you don't have to test your ingredients or the end products. The CGMP, though, that is enforced by the FDA. It's very large scale. You can't do one-off things at this scale. It has requirements for stability studies. So you have to do those studies and assign an expiration date based on that. It requires end product testing. So before 503B products can come out, they have to be tested to make sure that the amount of drug is correct. And if they're supposed to be sterile, that they actually are sterile. So this act, though, it's a kind of a legal gray area because this was created in response to the fungal meningitis outbreak from the New England Compounding Center in 2012. That was a human compounding issue. And this said that office use compounds can only come from 503B facilities. The thing is, the DQSA doesn't actually include animal patients. It was designed to address a human problem and be passed quickly. So it didn't include animals. But I'm sure you all can think of veterinary compounders that say that they are 503B. And there's a need. We do have a need for that. And then how the states chose to adapt that office use compounds must come from 503B to apply or not to veterinary patients varies by states. So why are we so concerned about office use? And this is the Illinois definition. It's similar across all the states, but it essentially is the administration of something that is non-patient specific and compounded that the practitioner either administers or dispenses from their facility. But the compounding pharmacy sent it to that practitioner without any patient-specific info. And what is legal about this is a continual evolution. So compounding has historically been regulated by the states. We got the fungal meningitis outbreak. We got the DQSA to respond to that. I gave FDA more oversight of that office use compounding, but doesn't apply to animals. So we turf it back to the states to decide how they're going to handle that. And so we still have questions. And essentially, you have to check your state laws on that still. But why are we actually concerned here? So let's look at what office stock looks like. So we have a pharmacy, and they're compounding one large lot of drug. And we're going to say they're doing it under the 503A rules, so USP standards. That pharmacy ships several doses of drug from that lot to facilities all over the country. They distribute those doses to several patients from each facility. That's how it essentially works. But what happens when back at the pharmacy level, we have a contaminated air duct that causes fungus to grow in the clean room and contaminates the injectable product. That's when we get high amounts of morbidity and mortality all across the country. That's what happened with the New England Compounding Center. We also can look at it from an animal side, though. It doesn't just happen on the human side. So we have our same type of pharmacy shipping doses to vets all over, doses distributed to several patients from each clinic. Well, what happens when we have a non-sterile EPM compound containing toltrazuril and pymethamine, and you're supposed to have very little pyrimethamine, but you end up with way more than you should because they flipped the concentrations of the two powders. You get morbidity and mortality spread out because this went to several patients. Now, in both of these cases, the error would have been harmful to a single patient still. The concern is the scale, because it's not an error that's necessarily going to happen every time. It happened this time. And when you're sending one lot, making a lot of drug at once to lots of patients, then you spread that morbidity and mortality problem across those. So those following the regulations helps decrease our risk, but we can also decrease our risk through clinical judgment. So the key question we need to be asking before prescribing compounds is, will this compound create a clinical difference in this patient? And the goal is that we want the most reliable product for each patient for safety and efficacy, dosage form and flavor, strength, availability. We need to consider all those factors. And so if we look at our source reliability, and this upside down pyramid goes from most reliable at the top to least reliable at the bottom. All of these things have a place in treatment. However, we should be using them in the direction this pyramid is going. The majority of our drugs should be FDA-approved drugs. Then 503B compounds are the next most reliable. Then 503A compounds. None of these are horrid things that you need to absolutely avoid. They're just different levels of risk. So we want to use the most risky in the fewest number of patients. And we can look at that list of what could go wrong. So the 503A list on the left here is the same list I showed you at the beginning of the presentation. That applies to 503A compounding. But if we take that list and look at it from the 503B perspective, we can actually cross off the first 4 bullets. Those concerns are addressed by the good manufacturing requirements that 503B facilities must follow. However, we do still have the risk of it lacking safety or efficacy. Those are things that are covered by FDA approval. These are still compounded drugs. They are not FDA approved. So we still have the potential that it might lack safety and it might lack efficacy, which is why we want to preferentially pick those FDA approved products. And we can also consider dosage forms and routes of administration in our risk considerations as well. The different dosage forms, different routes, they're not all created equal from a risk standpoint. And it has to do with how much data do we have on dosage of these medications by that route, and do we have concerns such as sterility concerns? Injectables, we typically have pretty good data on how much dose to give, but sterility can be problematic. Oral palatability can be a problem. So here are the formulations I reached for. And this is my opinion as a pharmacist based on knowing what we teach pharmacy students in school and actual experience of making these different formulations. So I'm going to say the first thing I reached for is an oral compound. Capsules, suspensions, solutions, tablets, treats, pastes would be lumped in this category because these things, they don't have to be sterile. So you've cut that risk out. And these are the things most likely to have been taught, especially capsules, suspensions, solutions to pharmacy students because they actually get very little compounding education. Then I'm going to reach for non-sterile topical compounds. These are pretty straightforward to make. And usually the fact that they're topical means they're not super risky if the concentration's a little bit off. Then sterile. These have that risk of they need to be sterile. However, pharmacy students probably get more sterile compounding education than any other type of compounding because human hospitals require pharmacists to do sterile compounding. So a large majority of those students will go on to do sterile compounding in practice. Non-sterile compounding is kind of more of a specialty area, even for humans, because it's just not done all that often in general pharmacy. And then transdermal, not super applicable in horses because I'm talking about giving it and then intending for a systemic effect, more of a concern with the cats. But let's look at that oral category just a little bit more. So let's start off capsules and liquids. Pharmacists are going to be the most familiar with these. Formulations are pretty straightforward and easy to develop. Stability information is often available. They're not usually that expensive. Then I'm going to go with tablets. Chew tabs, mini tabs, whatever kind of tablet you want to essentially have. These require specialized equipment, but the fact that they're a solid dosage form means they can be pretty stable. Then I'm going to go with anything formulated as a treat. Harder to get the drug uniformly distributed, and the stability data tends to be limited. And then paste. I know that's one of our favorite equine dosage forms. It is hard to get paste compounded and packaged into a dispenser accurately. So we rely a lot of times on those tubes of paste to be our dose measurements. And we dial it down to this point, push it to that point, we will get the right dose. Manufactured products are proven to have that be the case for those approved ones. Compounds, we have the same technology of packaging, but getting a paste into the tube without air pockets in a way that the dose gets measured accurately is really hard. So you have to be really good at that. And that's not something pharmacy students are like ever learning in school. But all of those dosage forms can be made very well or very poorly. There's not any one that is guaranteed to fit one end of the spectrum. So where it comes into figuring that out is quality of the compounding pharmacy you use. And there's lots of detail you could go into to thoroughly evaluate the quality, but we're busy. And so it's not really feasible to do that for every compounding pharmacy. However, I can walk around exhibit halls at conferences and chat with the compounding pharmacies and get a pretty good read on if it's one I want to consider more or not by asking two questions. So I frame one question to be, is this pharmacy duplicating commercially available products? And so this would be, okay, there is a product on the market that covers this condition. And so it is readily available, but it's pricey. So this would be like a meprazole paste. And so, you ask the pharmacy, will you make this? Essentially, will they duplicate it? And they go, well, no, but I can make it with this slightly different dosage strength or this additional ingredient added to it that really doesn't do anything. Well, in those cases, now you know the pharmacy is just trying to circumvent the regulations, and that's even more concerning. Then I'm going to ask and look and see if they'll make a product that is not clinically appropriate. Now, one thing I talk about transdermal and rofloxacin as an example, because that's an antibiotic stewardship concern. There's nothing illegal about it, but it's a big red flag. I would expect a pharmacist to know, hey, absorption concerns, highly important antibiotic, should be used judiciously, probably shouldn't go this route. Itraconazole, that would be one. Like things that are not necessarily illegal, but are not clinically appropriate. Because I want to know that the pharmacist is critically thinking about what they'll make, not just saying, oh, someone asked us for this once, so sure. Because you can really make anything you want. It's not hard to take drug powder and turn it into whatever formulation you want. But it's not a good idea in a lot of cases. So it's essentially your responsibility to make sure your client is aware of the fact when you prescribe a compound. And so understanding their pet's medication, is it FDA approved? Is it a compound? And if it's a compound, either directing them to a good pharmacy or making them aware that picking just the cheapest option they can find is not necessarily a good idea. So I think I left a couple minutes for questions. And I also have my contact info. You're welcome to reach out to me if you have additional questions as well.
We do have a few questions, not all of which are specific questions, maybe more like comment kind of things, so you may or may not be able to answer. But one of them is, can you give an example of a compounded drug Can you give an example of a compounded drug commonly used in vet med that is legal, that is made from bulk chemicals?
So one I would go with is cisapride. And so cisapride was removed from the human drug market back in the 90s because it caused serious cardiac side effects that outweighed any benefits. So it is actually on a list of things that you cannot compound for humans, but it is legal to compound it from bulk chemical for veterinary patients only, because there is no approved product to manipulate.
Okay. Now we get to the harder ones. What would your recommendation be for a field doctor trying to provide timely care to their patient when no approved animal drug is available? Legend or generic, and a compounded drug is needed the same day? Is holding a 7-day supply ethical for real-time use?
So I'm assuming this is talking about office stock. And in some states and for some products, yes, that can be. Check your state laws. A lot of states have gone with you could office stock compound for veterinary patients in a quantity reasonable to dispense up to a so many days supply, like 5 days, I think might have been California's. So check the state laws on that. But a lot of times, yes, you can have a small stock to be able to use because you have an immediate need for it.
Thank you. What about compounding a drug that the FDA approval? Oh, sorry, let me try this one again. It's really tiny print. What about compounding a drug that had FDA approval that is no longer available on the market? For example, Predef or Noquazone.
So if it's been withdrawn from the market for safety reasons, and it was a veterinary product, you cannot compound it. If it was withdrawn from the market for just not financially stable, reliable for the manufacturer, and it wasn't worth their effort to make, then you can compound it. If it was withdrawn for safety reasons on the human side, but those don't apply to the animal patients to that extent, then you can still compound it for animals. So it kind of depends why it was withdrawn.
Okay, we are getting down to the end, or the end of your session. So I don't know if this next question can be answered quickly. Can you comment on GFI 256 in relation to food animals? Many equine practitioners also see these species.
So GFI does talk about food animals. It is only allowing bulk chemicals for antidotes. Because with food animals, MDUCA gives us all sorts of extra restrictions due to withdrawal time concerns. And so for that, bulk chemicals just for antidotes. And they do have a list of when you can do which bulk chemicals you can use for that.
A comment more than a question. A compounding pharmacy expanding from Australia to the UK and now the US highlights a key gap. There's no integrated system linking adverse events, regulatory action, and API quality across jurisdictions. In Australia, the UK, and the US, signals come from adverse event reporting, inspections, and recalls. but API risks and compounding outputs remain fragmented and largely reactive to detect.
I completely agree with that.
Yeah, good comment from one of our Australian attendees tonight. Commenting from the future, thank you.
For the Australia attendees, I have done some compounding education there, and they have a requirement that any pharmacist that is doing what they call specialty compounding areas, of which veterinary is one of them, they must take a course approved by the TGA in that type of compounding. We have no requirements for training like that in the US. So that's one thing I thought was really great about Australia.
Cool. Back to that question about a drug that had been FDA approved and is no longer. How can you find out the reason that something's been withdrawn?
Sometimes through a Google search. Sometimes you can look up news things on the FDA's website and it'll talk about withdraw. There is a list, at least of the human products that have been withdrawn for safety and are not allowed to be compounded. So you can find the human ones for sure. I don't know that there's a comparable list for animal ones, though.
Okay. Well, Dr. Forsyth, thank you so much for this. And again, everyone, if we weren't able to answer your question, just email it to me. I'll drop my email address in the chat once again, and I will send it along and we'll try to get it answered for you. But now I'm going to bring on our final panelist for the evening, and that's Mike Casey, who is an attorney, and Dr. Stuart Brown. And as always, it'll take a moment for them to appear, so I will beg everyone's patience. Hi, guys, I see you. Let me get our screen share started. And okay, cool. All right, give me thumbs up again, you guys. Can we see Dr. Brown and Mike Casey? And we see the screen share as well. All righty, I think we're good to go, guys.
Thank you, Karen. It's great to be with everyone here tonight. This has been just a fabulous webinar, and the presentations thus far have been really, really great, in terms of providing a lot of relevant resource over this topic. And I know that's one of great interest to everybody. I'm Stuart Brown. Happy to be here with you tonight, really primarily serving in this role that I've been in for the last 15 years as a part of the Professional Liability Insurance Trust for the AVMA as a trustee. And I got really interested in this area of AVMA service some years ago, in particular because of its relevant importance to those of us in equine practice, because I found this to be such a really important member benefit. And so it's been a real honor and a privilege to serve in this role, advocating for many of us in equine practice. And having practiced for 30 years here in the Central Kentucky area and currently serving in this role as the Vice President of Equine Safety here at the Keeneland Association, these topics continue to be really extremely important and relevant to all of us in equine practice that we've been talking about tonight in terms of caring for our patients. I'm also really honored, though, to be joined here tonight by Mr. Mike Casey, who is one of those incredible resources as panel counsel for the AVMA Professional Liability Insurance Trust. Mike has particularly served in an incredible role as a resource for so many of us in equine practice over the years, and certainly his specialty area of practice, has really been a great benefit to the member insureds of the AVMA Professional Liability Insurance Program. So great to be joined here by Mr. Casey.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Brown. My name is Mike Casey. I'm an attorney at Casey Bailey Mains here in Lexington. I have been defending veterinarians in liability cases and administrative cases now for almost 30 years. This topic is one of the ones we come across the most in both administrative actions and in liability claims, and with the various regulatory bodies and pharmacy boards in each state We often have contradictory rulings and allowances, which makes this seminar so important. But also, like Dr. Brown said, allowing the membership to understand there are resources to reach out to ask questions to give you some guidance in how you deal with these issues is incredible. I handle a number of different types of law in my practice, all as a defense attorney. And the AVMA and the programs they put on and how they educate and are available to their members stands out as something that is unique in what I see. So I know the last thing people want to do is listen to a lawyer talk at 8:30 p.m. On just random topics. So let's get to it.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. So the next slide there, I did put that first slide up there, though, in terms of, just to remind me, too, that this is a group policy that is formed under the Professional Liability Insurance Trust. So assuaging the risk, that's associated with the program is spread out across all the demographics of the profession. So in your next slide, Karen, what we really had hoped to do tonight, just to provide sort of a reminder of the relevance of the AVMA PLIT program, that when should you reach out to the program, and what are the differences between potential claims and actual claims, and then in the instance where there's an actual lawsuit, and what happens when you report these incidents or claims. This program, though, as I mentioned before, has been a huge trusted resource. It's available to its member insureds, and I put that placeholder here just as a reminder that as we talk about, in particular, the topics we've discussed tonight, many times the trust wind up sitting in a position where, when its members insureds take an active role in reporting potential claims, we often are at the source of being able to identify and to provide feedback to our member insureds about trends that are beginning to be recognized. So, where we talked a little bit about where FDA has roles and where they don't have roles related to some products that may be found in equine veterinary practice. Many times we recognize some of these adverse type of events that get reported to the trust, and then we can serve as a resource back out to our professional affiliate associations to report those potential trends so that they can help to assuage risk for those of us in private practice. Next slide, Karen. So, when we talk about when you should reach out to the PLIT for help, if you have a potential claim, we encourage people to, and the member insurers, to file a report of a claim when you become aware of any incident that could lead to an exposure. So if, you have a client that's expressed dissatisfaction, or you recognize a complication with case management that occurs, and you think that you could have some exposure, we certainly encourage people to notify the trust to provide that level of engagement so that we can begin the process of being able to advocate for the needs of the member insurers. Certainly, if there's an actual claim, so you want to definitely make sure you file a report with the PLIT when there's a report of an alleged negligence or a lawsuit that's filed, or you're contacted by a licensing board, or you receive a demand letter from a client's attorney. Those are all instances where certainly you want to be in the forefront of reporting those claims to the trust.
And a very important issue in here is you have a finite period of time to respond to a lawsuit or a letter from an administrative entity. It is 20 days in most states to respond to a lawsuit. If you don't respond in that time, a default judgment can be entered against you, which will preclude your ability from arguing liability. On the administrative side, if you fail to respond to an administrative complaint or an administrative request for information, that failure to respond is actually technically a violation, and you can be sanctioned and have discipline imposed against you. It is critical that once you believe that there has been a threat of a lawsuit, an indication that someone is considering a lawsuit, to call the trust, report the claim. They'll take you through the process. In a real serious situation, they may even retain counsel at that period of time, so you can take the initial steps to protect yourself.
Thank you, Mike. So the next slide, if you find yourself in that situation in terms of reporting those incidents, it's then important to remember that related information is really critical for you to be providing to the trust at that time. We certainly speak about. And I know that the trust veterinarians talk a lot about the importance of record keeping. And so, the notice of the potential or actual claim in terms of the reporting form is the start for, the acknowledgement of the potential exposure that's there. We certainly want the veterinarian's written summary of the incident. So really knowing in your words, what has happened related to an incident. The medical records, though, are extremely critical, and any subsequent records that you may be able to provide are obviously key and relevant in terms of being able to defend a lot of claims in these cases. And certainly, providing any client demand if it's received, or a board complaint or a lawsuit whenever applicable.
And following up that as well, one important consideration is when you report a potential claim to the trust, those communications are actually protected. They are not discoverable if a lawsuit is filed. However, if you decide to respond to your client, if you decide to respond to your client's attorney, or even if you ask another member in your practice about the situation, those communications could be discoverable. So again, your first default should be to contact the trust, and they'll take you through the beginning of the process.
Yeah, I think it's important just to remember that we want to certainly provide that opportunity for the trust to defend its member insureds and to have all those options available. So the sooner you report those, the better position the trust can be to help to protect the member insured. Next slide there, Karen, please. So, certainly we recognize how busy so many of our member insureds are, especially all of us in equine practice. And so the website becomes also a really important and very functional tool for you to use in filing a claim. It certainly, if you need to reach out and you need to talk to somebody and you need to call, there's certainly the way to reach out and get that personal connection. But if you find yourself in a situation where you need to file these claims, and you can provide the next slide, Karen, there's lots of resources on the website in order for you to be able to do that, including, being able to submit. There's actually, key places on the website for you to be able to start in this claim center so that you can make and to address any of those potential notifications whenever the need arises. Next slide, Karen. So then we wanted to talk a little bit tonight too about what happens after a claim is reported. And so, Mike, do you want to provide us some background on, what happens next when someone files an incident claim with the trust?
Absolutely. And at first, it should be important to note that when Dr. Brown said that I'm panel counsel, what that means is myself or someone like me in your state will be assigned to defend you, but they are your attorney. They are not an employee of the trust, and they're not representing the trust. They're representing you. And so there are really two paths this goes. First is on the claim side, where the claim is assigned to a claims professional at Zurich Insurance Company through the AVMA program. That person will contact you, get the information on the claim, and then begin the process of first making sure that the claim fits under the coverage of the policy. Is it a veterinary incident? One of the things that I often hear from my clients when we're defending them is that we have a business relationship that with the claimant, that it was a bad result, and it's something that we just want to take care of. It is important to know that your insurance with the AVMA Trust is a liability policy. It's a professional liability policy. It pays when you're negligent, and not necessarily, it pays when you're negligent, not based simply on a bad result. We all know that in any profession, especially in veterinary medicine and in law or human medicine, there may be an adverse outcome, one that wasn't planned or wanted, but that doesn't mean there's been a deviation from the standard of care. And those are the evaluations that are made on the insurance side and also on the defense attorney side. There's situations where you've got a business relationship with your client that you would like to resolve something to keep that business relationship, but it may not be a veterinary malpractice claim. And those are things that you would discuss with your attorney, but also the claims adjuster. It is critically important that during the process, of the litigation or the claim, that you not make agreements with your client, that you not share information about the claims process with your client. The best thing always to say is, I'm sorry, I've turned this into my insurance carrier. They're working with it. I know they'll be in touch with you. I can tell you that the claims professionals that do work for the AVMA through Zurich are excellent in communicating with your customers or clients in order to keep them apprised of the claim situation. The last point in the last part of the bullet point is conduct a liability investigation. Most of the time that's done first by the insurance side, and that involves obtaining the medical records, having members of the AVMA trust review the medical records for a deviation for the standard of care, and make a determination that that deviation actually caused the alleged damages. And that's an important distinction between liability and administrative discipline. When you're in a civil lawsuit, when someone is suing you as a result of an injury to their horse, it's one thing to be a deviation. You didn't follow the standard of care. But the critical analysis is often in, did that deviation actually cause the adverse effect? And those are the things that the trust works with, often with defense counsel and expert witnesses, to make those determinations as to the appropriate defense. And if the case is not defensible, then the appropriate resolution of your claim. So we could go to the next slide, please. And here is what I think is such an important thing, and it often is difficult for you all. Keep your claim information confidential. Don't admit liability. Don't admit responsibility. Don't make any agreement to pay before you report the claim. Try not to discuss the claim with anyone other than your attorney, your people inside your practice, or your insurance carrier. We can protect those communications. Absolutely don't post comments about your claim on social media, and do not get engaged with a tit-for-tat response in defense of your practice on social media. What I always tell my clients is, as soon as I enter the case, I'm going to communicate either with the owner or the owner's attorney. I'll advise them that, all communications are to go through me. And I'll also instruct you that if your client calls you, blame the attorney. Tell them, hey, I'm sorry, I just can't talk to you about this. My attorney has warned me that I absolutely can't. At the appropriate time, I'm sure we'll have the ability to discuss this matter, but that's not right now. It's our job as your attorney to try to take you out of the firing line for that, even though we know how difficult it is and how important it is for you to maintain a professional relationship with your clients. Next slide.
So one of the things that I really wanted to highlight, and I think you can take away from a lot of the really relevant information that you get from Mr. Casey, is the fact that this program has been specifically designed and tailored for its member insureds as veterinarians. And so at the core of its existence is this extremely dedicated and wonderfully talented group of trust veterinarians that are there to review all the covered claims and to look at the professional liability coverage that's there, to evaluate what is needed to advocate for its member insurers. This becomes really a unique component of the program, but it's even extended beyond that to the specific carriers that represent this type of exposure coverage that is extended to our member insureds through the Zurich program. It's been very intentional. The approach that's been taken to extend to finding adjusters within programs like that that can advocate for our member insureds, to provide expertise like Mr. Casey and others to help to defend our member insureds when the need arises. And this review process becomes one of those things that we very intentionally focus upon in each step of the process to try to guarantee that we provide the opportunity to advocate for the best interest of the member insured, irregardless of the circumstances, in order to certainly protect the assets of our member insureds in the program. So it's one of the really unique features, I think, comprehensively of the program, in terms of the resources that have been dedicated to it, in terms of being able to be there to rise to the occasion when that need arises.
And from a defense attorney standpoint, this is very unique to the AVMA program. It is not common for us to receive assignments and cases from people where we have experts that are inside the program that we can educate ourselves with. You know, as an attorney, I'm not a veterinarian. I have learned enough veterinary medicine to be dangerous, but the most important thing I've learned is who to ask. And when you have this dedicated pool of individuals who have seen claims throughout the country, who have reviewed veterinary records, who are looking for key issues in types of actions or types of treatment for the standard of care, we have the ability to make really firm determinations on liability positions and the defensibility of claims very early. And litigation is a life of its own. In most cases, you're looking at 18 months to 2 years. In cases that we have this type of access to great experts inside, we're able to streamline a lot of the issues in litigation so we can provide thorough risk exposure evaluations and risk discussions with the veterinarians who are involved in the claims and agree on a path forward. Again, it's unique and it provides an enormous benefit to its members.
So the next slide, Karen, you know, that is there certainly provides you some additional resources with respect to tools that are there for the program. I also want to point out that, you know, one of the other aspects that has been really unique over the last 5 to 10 years, especially with the program, has been in the increasing investment in terms of the expertise that the trust have. Our CEO, Tracy Gray Walker, who's an insurance specialist, specifically has been brought on into this program to help make sure that we have built out an entire team of people who are there to address the needs comprehensively of the members of the AVMA across all aspects of veterinary medicine in terms of veterinary practice, but also geographically across the U.S. and Puerto Rico, and in terms of advocating for its member insureds, and especially as it relates to student members of the AVMA that are that receive coverage from the program. So I probably end a little bit on that in terms of summary, and then I know that Mike, I think you even talked a little bit about in the Q&A part to speak a little bit to the question about ThyroL in California, if you want to do that, and then any other, I'm sure, questions Karen might have.
Yeah, the reason I wanted to just touch base quickly on the ThyroL situation is because you have to understand when you're looking at what the regulatory agencies have said about various substances and drugs is you have multiple regulations you have to go through. ThyroL became important about 4 or 5 years ago in California when the Veterinary Medical Board launched disciplinary actions on dozens of equine veterinarians for use of ThyroL on the racetrack. Those equine veterinarians were using ThyroL with the express permission of the California Horse Racing Board. And in fact, there was a specific regulation that detailed when and how it could be used. And the California Veterinary Medical Board took the position that regardless of its express allowance by the CHRB, any use of ThyroL was prohibited because it was a misbranded medication. Multiple veterinarians ended up were found with disciplinary proceedings and had to pay fines as a result of the use. You also should consider that the Board of Pharmacy regulations have to be taken into account when you're making a determination of whether to use a medication or substance. All of those boards, if it's a horse racing board or HISA or a state regulation, or your pharmacy boards, can all have regulations that you can be found afoul of if you're not paying attention to trends.
And that actually kind of answers a few of the other questions. Somebody was just asking, is it illegal to use an FDA unapproved drug?
Illegal is a really bad word. Illegal is a criminal word. It is not in the realm of civil. Can the use of a non-FDA approved drug result in administrative penalties? It can, depending on the regulations in your state. I believe the phrase I wrote down was the FDA does not regulate the veterinary practice, doesn't regulate the standard of care. That's generally done by the various veterinary medical boards and also practitioners. So I caution people to use the word illegal because illegal has a criminal connotation. From the civil side, when we start getting into some of the gray areas, and that's what attorneys are good at, is making gray areas in these arguments. A lot is dictated by the standard of care. We know that there are medical devices out there that are being used off-label. We know the plain language of MDUCA doesn't necessarily apply to medical devices, and yet it is still within the standard of care of practitioners to utilize medical devices. Is it a perfect defense? Of course not. There are going to be objections by owners and individuals who have horses that are suffering the effects. However, we have to start taking a look at each one of those devices, how they've been marketed informally, how are they marketed through pharmacies, and what the veterinarians have the right to rely on and when they're treating.
And I think that your discussion of Thyro-L also kind of answered the question, do you have any real world examples of cases where veterinarians had legal/licensure problems related to prescribing/using unapproved drugs?
Well, I want to be careful here because a lot of that is confidential if there have been resolutions or even successful cases. But Thyro-L is absolutely the one that we dealt with for a number of years, and the inconsistency in the state regulatory bodies cost the members in California a great deal of stress, and many of them were disciplined and were disheartened that didn't have the right to rely on state regulations. That is one. Obviously there are other issues out there currently that we're working through that respectfully we can't comment on at this time.
No, understood. I'm going to harken back to the second part of a question we had at the very beginning when we were talking about FDA approval and compounding. What are the legal ramifications to a veterinarian should an adverse event occur using a generic compounded formulation?
Should be nothing. I mean, again, well, let's be careful. If it's a medication that is adulterated or non-sterile, meaning it did not, in the manufacturing process, there's an error or something that occurred that resulted in the medication being provided to you in a manner that wasn't consistent with its labeled ingredients or its labeled condition, it is deemed to be adulterated. If a horse has an adverse health effect due to an adulterated medication due to the manufacturing process, the veterinarian should not be liable because any of their actions did not cause an infection or an illness. It's the drug itself.
Okay, and we'll finish up with one clarification. Someone asks, did Mr. Casey just state discussion of a case within a practice is protected? The first speaker mentioned not sharing with other associate practitioners whose conversations are discoverable. Did I just misunderstand?
Okay, so there are going to be natural situations where you have to share information within your practice as to the nature of a claim. You can't conceal information, or you should not conceal information that could result into the inability to treat. For instance, if you are an internal medicine person and something has impacted a horse and you believe that the wrong medication was administered, and now that horse is going into surgery or has some advanced therapies as a result of that, you've got to provide complete information. If you are having internal communications about a lawsuit or a claim, simply reporting what it is, you have to look at your company guidelines, your company policies. Is there an adverse result panel if you have a large practice where they go through and triage and see what occurred? You should follow your policies and procedures. It is possible those communications could be discoverable. it is possible that those communications could be used against you in litigation. So it is a fine line to walk when you have established protocols and procedures in place of how to report adverse events internally, and you don't follow those, as opposed to providing those and running the risk of a future discovery. There are different regulations and rules on admissibility and discoverability of communications that are internal to healthcare providers and veterinarians with regards to reporting events so that they can have basically a causal investigation internally. In Kentucky, those are discoverable. So we tend to always tell people to make sure your attorney's name are on those communications, even if the attorney isn't involved in the communications. If the communications to a practice manager or other people in the practice also include the attorney on an email, those will be protected.
Okay, and I lied when I said that was the last question. We have one more quick one. What role, now they keep coming up. Stop it, you guys. What role does written informed consent play in mitigating legal risk of using a compounded medication in the USA?
It is a great question. Informed consent. Well, first, let's look at Texas. Texas is the only state that I'm aware of that has specific language in its regulation where using a compounded medication or even an FDA-approved medication for a use that is novel and unique should be disclosed to your client. Whether you use compound medications or not, if you disclose that you're going to use compounded medications, even in a generic retainer agreement, it will offer you more protection. But I want to caution you on this because it is not to say that the use of compounded medications alone is sufficient to create liability. It really is the nature of the compounded medication. Is it a medication that the industry of veterinarians recognizes as within the standard of care? So I always would recommend in your retainer agreements or your documents about what you may, if you're entering into long-term partnership with people, it would not be a bad idea to state that you're going to be using compounded medications or other medications consistent with AMDUCA and other federal and state regulations. That will protect the initial complaint. But I also don't want to create the impression or even the thought that the use of compounded medications without informed consent is a deviation. I hope that made sense.
Okay, now I promise this will be the last question. And this one harkens back to the discussion about speaking with other members of your practice.
Sure.
Would all components of client communications documented within medical record software be discoverable?
Yes.
Well, that was a
Yes.
quick answer right there.
Yeah, anything, yeah. So what's not discoverable? The better way to look at this is what's not discoverable. Communications with your attorney are not discoverable per se. Can't get them. Communications in the anticipation of litigation, which encompasses communications with your insurance carrier about the substance of the event, are not discoverable. Communications in medical records don't fit into either of those categories. They are the medical record. In fact, if you put something in there, if you put something in a medical record that indicates a potential error, and then a claim is made, if you take that out, you are absolutely committing a violation of state medical boards, and you're running very close to civil liabilities for altering medical records. And those can also lead to what we call spoliation instructions, which could have negative inferences where actually a judge will tell the jury that you are allowed to draw a negative inference that the removal of that information was a relevant and critical component to the liability determination. So if it's in the veterinary records, it has to be produced.
Okay, well, I'm going to call it an end with that. And this has been an amazing discussion. And I would like to thank everyone who joined us this evening. Thank you so much to Ashley Morgan, Lauren Forsyth, Cindy Bernsteel, Stuart Brown, and Mike Casey. Really excellent discussions from top experts. We're so grateful for your generosity. There are an awful lot of applause and thumbs up emojis going past the screen. I'm always disappointed that those don't show up in the recording. Thank you as well to our sponsor for this session, American Regent Animal Health, and their representative, Dr. Howland Mansfield. Thanks to my IT backup, Amity Wall. And thank you to all our attendees. Excellent questions this evening. I know people are asking about getting answers to some of the questions we weren't able to get to, and I will do my best to gather up those answers and share them along with the on-demand recording. I'll also try to share all those links that went past. You're going to have to give me a couple days to get all that done and to get your CE certificates to you. But thank you. And with that, I think I'm just going to go ahead and hang up on all of us. That's what I have to do on these. So I think I'm going to stop my share though. Let's see. I'm going to plop me right over there. And yeah, thank you. It was a fantastic presentation. I agree, Dr. Klein. Okay, so I'm going to hang up on us. And again, appreciate it very much. This is a really important subject. I'm glad we could bring it to you. So, see you soon. Bye.